right now. All right, going to call this meeting to order. Kim.
Evening, Mayor and Council. I'm going to switch over here. So this work session is kind of a build-off. We talked about about some potential hotel motel programs that other municipalities have implemented. So we kind of took some of the feedback that the City Council had received, and we thought we would come forward with kind of a narrower version, maybe a more North Kansas City specific, and we'd like to kind of present that and get some additional feedback, see if this is still something that the City Council would like us to bring forward, and then go through the formal code process, actually writing and proposing that more formalized code. So again, just so everybody knows what the program goals are, it is to protect the public interest, health and safety, and to assure proper management and management of facilities. Reducing the number of resources used to provide safety, crime prevention, criminal investigation through a structured, data-driven crime intervention program. So one of the things that we are presenting is still a tier program, meaning that there would be different things that if you fell into one bucket versus another, you would be required to fulfill as part of the program, and that is done off of data. That is, what are we responding to? And I will kind of get into, I know that there are some concerns about what types of calls would be entered into this, and we'll kind of dialogue about that in a few minutes here. So one of the things that we kind of heard was we wanted to reward hotels or motels that were really following the policy and doing everything that they needed. And so one of the things we're talking about today is reviewing those calls on a biannual basis, meaning that if a hotel or motel was doing everything right, reducing their calls, that in 6 months they could maybe be moved to a different tier. On the reverse of that, if we're seeing some slide on one of the hotel motels on a biannual basis, we'd slide them into a different category and ask them to start doing a few more tasks to ensure that their call volume is managed. So that would be from the police chief would run those numbers. On January 31st, those hotels would be notified as to what tier or what bucket they are in, and then relook at those numbers and let those hotel providers know January 31st what bucket they would be assigned to for the remainder of that calendar year.
I think you said January 31st twice. Was it June? Or no, it's not biannually, it's
January 31st
July. Okay.
And July 31st. If I said that wrong, I'm sorry.
It was probably me. I probably heard it wrong.
And just to kind of review where those buckets would be if we were to implement the program today, which I'm not suggesting we are, this is where the hotels that we currently have in operation in North Kansas City are, their room numbers, their call numbers, and what tier they would be assigned to today. So we'll kind of go over what Tier 1 would look like, and that would apply to all hotels, meaning, you've got 0 calls for the year up to 0.5 calls for the year. And that would be to provide 24-hour a day, 7-day a week front desk personnel. The police department has done quite a bit of outreach, and that seems to be what everybody is providing today. So that wouldn't be asking anything above and beyond what is currently being performed, just making sure that service doesn't slide. Install and maintain lighting in the lobby, parking lots, indoor and outdoor common areas of the hotel. That would be something that would need to be assessed, meaning is the light bright enough? Is the light in the right places? Provide the chief of police with a designee of record. And Chief, this is something that you guys are already doing. Did you want to talk to why that is structured that way?
So one of the things that we need to make sure, because of some of the problems that we've been having recently, is making sure that we've got somebody that we can go and talk to and hold them accountable for what's going on at their property. Certain hotel that we've been dealing with here lately, it was problematic to try to find and identify the owner. And we've done it, and we have their attention now, but it's why we think it's important that every property gives us that designee, that person where the buck stops, basically.
So we have no requirement like that now. Okay.
No, sir.
No, we collect information through a business license
Yeah.
process, but typically speaking, that is not a designee of record. That is, generally speaking, somebody who operates their financial perspective, meaning that's the person who can get a tax clearance letter, that's the person who's in charge of regulatory, but that is not the person in charge of operations.
So more similar to what we do with like landlord registration now. Okay. Perfect.
Getting in contact with one person at any given time could prove difficult, I would think. Is there a possibility of having a second designee?
Well, that's kind of where the next bullet comes in, is
Aha.
the operations person, provide the operations person. The designee of record is more the daytime, like something happened over the weekend or something's going on that we need to address with that ownership of that property. It's not necessarily a time and place violation, like, hey, you got something going on, we need you to respond here.
So the next thing is just to maintain the guest log per state statute, maintain a daily key log, limit the number of rooms that can be rented to 2 times within a 24-hour period. Again, that's not something that is mandated currently.
Why 2 times? Why not just once in a 24-hour period?
So we actually, the police department has talked with the hotel providers, and Chief and I sat down with another one. That is what a lot of cities that have implemented a style of program like this is. One of the hotel providers says that that is the standard. They operate multiple hotels in multiple states, and they say when they see regulation, it's generally this.
Is there any reason why?
An example that could be used locally is we have a lot of railroad traffic through North Kansas City. A lot of their staff sometimes gets put up in our hotels. Sometimes they may be getting off of a train at 3 o'clock in the morning and need a place to sleep right then. So they may rent that room out to them right then in the middle of the night. They may get up at 6, 7 o'clock in the morning and go back to work, get back on the train. And now you want to make sure that that hotel has the ability to rent that room again.
Okay.
So that's that 2 times in that 24-hour period example that we're kind of leaning on.
Makes sense. Thanks.
Require government-issued identification for all adults seeking to become a guest or occupant in the room, temporary or permanent, or any employee. Report guests that are trying to use false information to the police department. Obtain and document guest vehicle information, including make, model, color, license plate number, and keep those records for a minimum of 60 days. And again, what that does is it gives the police, should there have been an incident that's maybe not reported immediately, maybe they recognize that something has happened, it's 2, 3, 4 days later or a month later, the police department now has something to go off of to maybe investigate that particular crime in a more fruitful manner. And at the request of the hotel provider, police department will provide the hotel with advice concerning crime prevention through environmental design standards and general crime prevention methods.
We had a couple, Councilmember Tolden and Smith.
This winter, when we had people without shelter when it was cold and we put them up in the hotel, Chief, do you know if having identification was an issue or not?
I don't know that for sure, but I don't think so. Because of going through Northland Assistance Center and Rita, I don't know that that was, I thought they required it, if recollection was, and if they didn't, they worked through other channels to get them shelter somewhere else.
Okay.
That was my question, but I guess to follow up, if we were to run a program similar again, and we had somebody who needed shelter, didn't have a government ID, would that just rule them out? They would go somewhere else? Or could we have like a carve-out for something like that?
Part of me wonders if there couldn't be a consideration if it was part of the city's program.
We are the
I would
ones
have to
putting
kind of
them up.
chase that down a little bit, but I could see where the concern is. But I think that as long as, and I don't know how those rooms are rented, I would imagine that Northland Assistance Center has some kind of a policy or an agreement that takes a little bit of ownership of who that person is renting that space.
I mean, I'd like to see that, just figure out how all that works, because that could be a sticking point. It's negative 10 degrees outside. We don't want to be figuring it out then.
I do know that there are several shelters in the area that will take persons without an identification.
But we only use the hotel if the shelters are full, right?
Correct.
Correct.
Yeah.
So that would be Tier 1. Tier 2 would be 0.5 to 1 calls, service calls per room. So they would need to do everything in Tier 1, and this is in addition to. And that would be to retain a copy. So before, you just had to show it. Now we're asking those hotel providers to retain a copy of that government ID. Install and maintain operations of digital surveillance cameras with a recorder in the lobby, parking lots, indoor and outdoor common areas, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and the retention of the video should be for a period of a minimum of 60 days. Again, what that does is it's giving our investigators some resources just in case they are looking into a crime that has been reported. And ensure a police department crime prevention assessment of the property is complete. So that would be Tier 2. Tier 3 would be Tiers 1 and 2, in addition to ensure that individuals visiting hotel occupants leave by 11 p.m., run guest names through the National Sex Offender website as first established in 2005, and keep a log of the guests that are on that list available for reference by the police department or any guests requesting this information. Ensure that parking passes are issued and recorded for all vehicles allowed to park on the premise, with each parking pass with a date and the date issued and the expiration date on it. This would be for all hotels and motels with a parking lot that only services the hotel-motel operations. Keys found to be missing must have their corresponding locks rekeyed prior to the room being re-rented, and each master key missing is required for the establishment to rekey all corresponding locks. Records of all rooms being rekeyed shall be maintained by the hotel provider for a minimum period of 12 months. Conduct a semi-annual training session for all employees and staff on crime prevention techniques assisted by the police department. To become certified in the police department's crime-free hotel program. Chief, did you want to touch on what that program, that's already an existing program? Oh, did you have a question? Okay, I was like.
So crime-free hotel motel is an existing program. It's nationwide as part of the bigger community policing philosophy and some of the stuff, CEPTED, crime prevention through environmental design, hotel motel. So it's just a way to teach the hotel operators how to keep a safe property and give them the tools that they need to continue to operate how we think that they should operate. It's a national standard. It's not something we make up. It's something that we send our people to be certified in being able to teach this.
Councilmember Smith, Saper.
A couple questions on that, on this list. So visitors out by 11 p.m., how do we do that? Is that an honor system?
It's difficult. Yeah. That is kind of by design for the, to make sure that they're not renting rooms to people that are going to be throwing parties.
Sure.
The after prom parties and stuff like that, that sometimes we this is the season for that. We're making sure that just, 5 or 6 people are showing up to a room and loud noise and music and carrying on, and 11 o'clock, it's time to make sure you knock on the door and say, everybody but the renter has to leave right now.
Okay, so it's not like instituting a quiet hour. It's like you got to go.
Right.
Okay, so but it would only trigger if they were being disruptive.
It would only trigger if they were being disruptive, and it would only really trigger us if we were called.
Okay. Follow up to that. Number of guests per room. Is there any, like, if we can't have visitors that are being unruly, but say they're all hotel guests, they got 12 guests in the room, do we set an upper bound on that?
I think that I would say we would have to work with the hotel. Most hotels have a maximum number that you are allowed to rent a room toward.
It can be
Sure.
actual registered guests.
Correct. These would have to be, because remember, Tier 2 and Tier 3, I need an ID. Everybody in that room was supposed to come and show me their government ID. I pull a copy of it. It's in the record.
And if-
So if they show up and, oh, we're all registered guests. Well, that's funny because I only have 4 IDs on file that are adults. We actually had a hotel provider tell us that this has been highly effective for them on their properties.
Okay.
They actually have more restrictive ones in other cities that they operate with, and they said that it makes a big difference. It takes the burden off of them. They're not the bad guy. It's city policy. Hey, this is not my policy. It's my, city's making me do this. So they said that it was actually a nice policy to have so that it takes the owner and bad guyness off of them as the operator.
Sure. One more question. The missing keys piece. Do we have any physically keyed doors in the city that we know of, or is it all cards? Like key
I
cards?
think they're all key passes.
Okay.
But that's the same key card system. When we're talking about rekeying, that's what we're talking about, is if that card goes missing, then the access for that card is wiped and it's rekeyed.
Gotcha.
And
Okay.
they do have electronic key logs already that they keep on those things.
I'm going to ask one follow-up, and then I'll get to you, Saper, on that. So if you're there at 11:30 at night, can you ticket the individual that was present in the room, or this just going to count against the hotel?
It's going to count against the hotel.
Okay, so we wouldn't, still nothing you'd be able to do on the individual there.
The guest?
Yeah.
No.
If there's 15 people in a room and they're telling you to kick rocks.
Not how we have this built. No.
Okay. Councilmember Saper.
Just in regard to the master keys, has there been a problem with lost or stolen master keys?
Not that I'm aware of. But there's no reason why we can't be preemptive on this also, just to make sure. There has been situations where someone has tried to get another key to a room claiming to be a guest in that room.
Mm-hmm.
They aren't on file as the registered guest. They're causing a disturbance, and guess what? The police get notified, and we're there. And so some of the protections, like Ms. Nakahoto said, is like putting the burden on city policy versus the hotel saying that we're just doing this just to do it.
Councilmember Smith.
Yeah, just follow up on just kind of the procedure of that 11 p.m. I'm still processing. So if it's after 11 and people are being rowdy, then you get a call. It would be hard for the hotel to have known that was a problem. Police come out, and now they're getting a ticket, but they didn't know until the rowdiness happened. So I want the rule to be on the book. I like the rationale behind it. It's just the enforcement seems like it's going to be so tricky. It's like if we show up and write them a ticket, they didn't even know it was a problem until you showed up.
And I think that that's where you kind of get into who's initiating the call. Is the hotel saying, listen, you guys got to get out of here at 11, I'm about to call cops.
Sure.
Do you know what I mean? Well,
Yeah.
then that would be a hotel provider initiated call.
Sure. I'm just thinking, like, if I'm in a hotel, right, and, like, the people near me are being rowdy, like, I'm the person that'll call the front desk and say, hey, can you calm me down? Somebody might call the cops. I've seen it happen. I used to stay in a ton of hotels. I've seen the cops show up, and the hotel seem to have no idea. So, like, just thinking through if that would get them, in a lot more trouble, if they get cited, or I'm sure you guys will use judgment on all that. But
Well, it kind of comes back into how we're trying to maybe build the back end of this too, with an abatement process, maybe more than an automatic ticket for every offense. So again, having that hotel representative on file and say we can bring them in or call them in and say, this was a problem this weekend.
Yeah.
What steps are you going to do to remediate it next time? And then tell us, and we'll help you solve your problems, basically.
sure.
But I don't necessarily, I think you're right on point. You may have been in hotels where the police are called first, but if there's loudness out of an adjoining hotel room, most of the time the front desk is going to be the one that's notified. And we're now expecting them to take action because
Yep.
they've been put on notice at this point.
Councilmember Clevenger.
Couple of things. You had said in a previous presentation, I believe, that in other cities, this has caused a reduction in the police calls at the hotels, correct?
Yes, I have implemented this style of program in another municipality.
Right. And as far as have they ever had a problem with hotels that are not wanting to change tiers, maybe that are not calling when they need to call? Has that ever been a problem, or have we heard of that, or is that a possibility? What's your thoughts on that?
I think it kind of goes to that relationship. where you have the officers that would be working with these hotel providers. I mean, those are more community-oriented police. Initially, any program that you implement, it's going to be met, it's different, good or bad. So I think that there's going to be a learning curve component of it. I mean, what we hope with these tiers is that they see the carrot. You know, all policy interventions are carrot and stick. What we would hope is that they would see the benefit, the reduction in their own staffing time, needing to address these style of issues. Like I said, I have seen this firsthand, what this style of program can do. It creates better relationships between the city and those operators, and those calls do go down. Because those police officers are in there, they understand if there was stuff still happening and calls not coming. We're really going to try to make sure that that doesn't happen. What we don't want to have is fake numbers. You know, what we don't want to have is hotel providers not calling for service.
Sure.
I mean, the chief has kind of talked about it. You'll see when we get to it, we've kind of expanded more of an abatement model. And again, some of that was, we're trying to listen to the feedback that we're hearing and working with those hotel providers through an abatement versus we're pulling out, you know, the ticket book, here it goes.
Right. I'm sure you'll build good relationships, so thank you.
Councilmember Graves.
Yes, thanks for all the work you put into this, and I'm curious if you could elaborate on the last point on this slide about the digital surveillance camera, giving the police remote access. So is that like in the, was it the dispatch room? Would there be like screens basically 24/7
No.
showing the?
No, there are a few businesses around town right now that allow us access to their systems. We don't actively run them. We can remote into them if we need to.
So it's just like on demand?
Correct.
It's not 24/7?
Yes, sir.
Because I don't think it would necessarily be a bad thing, but I could see that creating like a negative feedback loop where if you had somebody just constantly watching, then there would be just constant activity.
Well, and also what we
reported.
don't want is to become the private security for a
Yeah.
private business, public security for a private business.
So it's more for like if there's a call, you can just dial in and be like, have a live view of what's happening.
Yes, sir.
Okay, that makes sense.
Councilmember Saper.
I like the basically non-punitive structure of this whole program. However, the way it's written, it almost, in the future, could change. And would just like to emphasize that at this time, we want a non-punitive program, as this is structured.
Well, that's what I was going to get to. Is there more slides on? There we go. There, perfect.
There
There's the
are.
rest of my questions probably answered right here.
So I kind of went over how kind of your bucket would be determined. There'd be official notifications, and again, we spoke to several hotel providers on what would be, you know, if the city council, you guys, you know, bring forward everything, the gavel hits, what is a good expectation time for a private business owner to come into compliance with what their bucket is? Understanding supply chain issues, you're going to have to install stuff, there's training, and 90 days is kind of what we heard. So that was how we framed this program, that, okay, if you move buckets, you would have that amount of time to come into the new parameters of that bucket. The police department would be the one that would be doing all the inspections, and then if upon inspection, you would enter an abatement process that is similar to several of the other police department programs. And again, what we're trying to do is align a lot of police department already programs so that it's not out of whack of what we're doing with several other programs that have some form of formal abatement process. And again, should we need to go to a higher penalty version, there is subject for a fine up to $500 or incarceration. Again, that's a standard municipal court violation. That would be up to the discretion of the judge, as all of them are. And should we get 90 days past where the abatement should have been cured, the city council, or the city could revoke the business license. Business licenses are required for hotel motel operators per the state, per the Missouri state statute. So unlike other business licenses here within the city that can be, you know, we don't really have a formal business revoking process. But for hotel providers, that is something that is required by the state. And again, failure to adhere could be grounds for citation. And again, what it does is it gives that police officer, if things are really heading toward a bad way, or again, the abatement is not cured, the phone calls, the visits, the letters, now we're getting into the punitive actions.
Councilmember Smith.
Obviously, we hope it never gets to the point where we have to do that, but in practice, if we did, a number of these hotels are being used for long-term stays. People will stay months at a time. In practice, if we pull the business license, it shuts them down per state. Does everybody get evicted from the hotel? And that
So that
sounds like
would
a
be the
pretty messy
state.
process.
So how it would work out is the city would notify the state, and I hate to say it, the ball would be in the state's court. I can't speak for how the state timeline would be to take action. Sometimes they are quick, oftentimes they are not. But again, that's where, so one of the things a municipal court judge can do is fine every day for violation. So there starts to be some real money being imposed for every day that they're out of violation. So, but as for how individuals are rehomed, there would be notification, and they would actually have to follow all the state guidelines as if it was, they were renting from a private homeowner or a hotel, that abatement period. They would be out of, they wouldn't be able to, new residents wouldn't be able to come in. But typically speaking, when a state has shut down a hotel, there's a transition period.
Thanks.
That's kind of the end of our presentation. Direction, do you guys like what you're hearing, not like what you're hearing?
I like the direction it's going. I think it's a good program. I think it. A couple questions I guess I had. Were we able to figure out how Harris fits into this?
So if you'll notice,
And maybe you had that.
we did have a consideration on the parking passes for all hotel motels with a parking lot that only services hotel motel operations. When we chatted with Harris, it would be impossible for them to separate the parking for hotels and the parking for their regular operations, whether that be you're going to go see a show, you are going to go have a dinner out. So that provision was put in there specifically for Harris. Should the city council kind of go, yes, we're providing down here, our assumption would be there's no way to tease out. We talked about the fact that they have one address and everything is dispatched to one location. There's no way to tease out the hotel versus if it was a parking lot call through a CAD, just a quick CAD system without having to manually go through and code everything. We would assume them to be tier 3 and require them those operations. Some of the challenge would be that leave by 11 p.m. That would be a challenge for them to be able to manage that. So I think that we would probably have to have some ongoing conversations with Harris leadership to see how this program could be implemented, considering they are very unique. I mean, they are a 24-hour shop attached. They don't have separate parking. So I think that the majority of these things they are already following. It's just part of their SOP, part of their practice. I would say the ones that would be challenging for them, I'm inferring, would be the 11 p.m. leaving. And then, like I said, we have addressed their parking pass considerations in this verbiage.
Could any parts of the program, I guess, potentially be considered unfair then? If they're under a different parameter and they're not being tracked the same as other hotels? Could someone possibly bring that to court and say, I'm playing by much different rules than they are?
I am no Tom Barzee.
Okay.
That would be a Tom Barzee question.
I think the fact that the way we're going to approach this with them is to automatically place them in the
Yeah.
highest tier already.
Yeah.
So they are having to follow all the rules.
Okay, I think that would be, okay. So I guess I'd have to have a good understanding of what it is that, making sure they are doing all those and what they are and aren't already. Councilmember Smith.
I guess for me, I really like the program. I like where it's going, where it's headed. My concern is kind of what Zach mentioned and what was brought up before is if we're using the metric of calls for service, does that give them the disincentive? And we could celebrate in a year, we see a whole lot fewer calls for service, but are they just not reporting? And I don't know how we tell that other than run the program and see what falls out. But that gives me a little bit of heartburn that they're just going to be reluctant to call when they actually would need the assistance.
To follow up to that, are most of the calls coming from the hotel now or coming from other people?
A lot of the incidences now are, I would say it's probably about a third. It's either self-initiated by the officer who's patrolling the property. Some of it is by the hotel operator. And again, we're getting some response from some of our problem hotels already, and they're calling more, which is, to your point, problematic for them is in a tier system.
Right.
But then that's where the education piece comes in for us to help them, because if they can prevent problems before they occur by the type of clientele to a degree that they're renting to, looking for cues, clues, and then deciding this is not the clientele that's beneficial to my business, and then weed that out on their own, then they're less likely to need to call. But yeah, we are seeing an increase right now in one of our properties because we've got their attention and they're in there trying to do better and they're trying to clean it up, and that is a success for us.
So with that being said, do we consider, maybe putting the program out there, letting them know this is coming, but delay implementation by, 2 or 3 months to see if we capture some more of that now, get more of the education done now, and then you're kind of starting fresh?
I think another thing to consider too is once the properties implement some of the physical factors that they have in the tiers, they're not likely to recede. Once you put in the surveillance cameras, you're not probably gonna turn them off just because you now move down into tier 1. If you're already by practice running the sex offender registry, maybe it's just something that you keep doing. So I don't necessarily I think where they're at is where they're at right now. The back of the baseball card doesn't lie.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what we're working on.
Got it. I saw a hand over here somewhere. Councilmember Toll.
I really like the scaffolding of support, and I think the businesses will like it when it gets running. What the mayor said was kind of exactly what I was thinking, which is I think you will get more calls at first while they try to crack down, but I wouldn't delay implementation because then people tend to delay anyway. But we could delay any movement, any penalties from it, like give them the first 6 months to get on board and discuss. I mean, as a thought. And I viewed the 11 p.m. curfew as more of a tool for you. So there's a very easy, okay, we have your ID and your ID and your ID. Everybody go without an argument as to whether or not you are truly being disruptive or, it just looked like something easy, not necessarily a fine. But I would anticipate the calls to go up as people start cracking down before everything gets better.
And I also like the abatement process for that, because it gives us that tool to sit down with the operator and say, what are you doing? Together, we will work on what are you doing to fix these problems. And if we see, and then there's a time window there also. Okay, we're going to say the abatement is 30 days to do this, this, and this. And if we see you're doing it or making a good solid effort to do it, then there's not going to be a citation issued. If they're just thumbing their nose at us and saying they're not going to do it, then that's when the hammer comes down.
Councilmember Roberts.
2 things. I think with Harrah's, they do have on-staff security 24 hours, and I think that they're going to be able to handle, they're probably already doing most of these things. I mean, I know they have security systems. They're probably the least of the worries, I think, in the what would be the tier 3 system. So I don't know if do we get a lot of calls from them about like visitors after 12 o'clock that are specific to the hotels? Do you know?
No, because it's just too difficult to parse that out right
Yeah.
now. Just for an example, they're in their relicensing phase right now, and so we got contacted by the Gaming Commission to give us the calls for service for the last 4 years, and it's a book. But those aren't all criminal things either. They're motorist assist, they're ambulance calls, they're fire calls, there are a lot of different things that are going on there, but because they're all clumped into one address, it's hard for us to tell what's going on at specifically at the hotel.
That makes sense. I think the other thing is, I think we do jump on this. I think getting, if they're all aware of it, there's only a handful of hotels in our area. I think if we give them a 90-day window starting May 1st, so the implementation would basically be August 1st, that should be plenty of time, especially if you're like, right now, this is the tier system you would be in. You kind of have 90 days to clean that up and start implementing these processes. I think that it sounds like we're all in agreement of that. I think that's a good time frame and a good date. It's really longer than 90 days because we'd be going off of like a May 1st.
Yeah, I'm not sure
assuming-
how quickly we'll be able to turn around the code, the formal process, the formal adoption that you would need to take to authorize us to begin.
Councilmember Saper.
It's come up several times, the fact that they have one address at Harrah's. Is there any way to unbundle that? Would they be agreeable to it, and what's the problem with unbundling that, several different addresses?
It's complicated. The reason why it's complicated is you have to work with a different level of government to get those mailing addresses parceled out, and then there would be some staff training, meaning that, when you're calling for an assistance, you may not realize, oh, now I'm in 9503 versus 9501. So I think there's even some user error within that facility. There would have to be some legal definition. That is how addressing is done. You know that probably more than most. We're actually working with a project right now that is having some addressing is a challenge because they have multiple units. So, it's something that we could discuss with Harrah's, but I'm also very sensitive to what that could do for them and if we would even get valuable information because, again, it's that person calling, what number are they, do they even know where they're at and that is a different address. So I think that could be challenging to tease out. To get real usable data, it could be 5-10 years before that really is understood at the staff level that I'm now standing at this address versus that address.
I guess I would like to see that conversation with Harrah's take place. And you're right, it could be an ongoing one over time, but it would certainly clarify a lot of our data and how we respond to it.
That was built before we really did a lot with data.
Councilmember Smith.
This might be a silly question, but we have 23 minutes to burn before our real meeting comes on up. So January 31st, July 31st, somebody made that decision instead of year end and June 30th. Any particular reason?
31st was the date that I had seen in a lot of ordinances, and again, it's after December 20, the end of December. Takes a while to run those numbers. Generally speaking, it's holiday. People are, there's some staff time consideration. And then we kind of went, what's kind of like a half year. The 31st, and you need to be in a bucket by 90 days. And again, understanding it's 31st plus 90 days, and then July 31st plus 90 days before they're in compliance. So you kind of get into either you're not doing the 6 month or you're shortening the 90 days. Otherwise, they're only in play in their tier, possibly for a very short time horizon. Does that make sense?
I was just more curious why it wasn't year end.
I don't think there is any reason behind it, and I think it's pretty arbitrary.
Okay, I just figured
I don't-
somebody made a decision.
I think at this point, like Mr. Roberts said, if we enacted this on May 1st, we could take the 6 months from there, and that's your 6 month window, and your year window, it's always a May 1st cycle. It's not a big deal for us, it's just a matter of inputting dates into the CAD software.
Sure, okay, just curious there.
Thank you. Further questions, comments? Councilmember Green.
So I have a random thought, might be a good idea, might be a bad idea, so I'll throw it out there. What if, instead of like delaying implementation, things like that, what if we just start everyone on tier 1 instead of just automatically slamming those 3 people into tier 3 and just starting them off, you're starting off at tier 1, let's see how the first 6 months go and go from there. Or should we just start them at tier 3 automatically?
I would argue that you're trying to solve a problem that's already in existence, and they probably need to be in tier 3 right now.
I guess the reason I had that thought is you mentioned that there's a hotel that's currently kind of trying to get their act together. So it's trying to maybe be wishful thinking.
Getting their act together means being in tier 3.
It's nice to have wishful thinking. We'll see. Time will tell. Time will tell. And the particular property that we're talking about, you know, they have a general manager on site now that's kind of more or less their fixer for their company. And if their fixer moves on, it's only as good as the next property manager that's in place. And so we're trying to get policy in effect to combat for that next potential problem property manager on site.
One other random question that you probably know, aside from Harrah's, do any of these hotels have their own security guard or security apparatus, or they just use our police department?
One property tried to, they hired their own outside security for a little while, probably about 18 months ago. It didn't go too well for them. They were overbearing to a degree and were causing more problems than they were fixing. So, no, to answer your question, none of the other properties have on-site physical security right now besides Harrah's.
So it's not, hasn't shown to be effective. It's not a cost thing, it's just, it's not an effective
I wouldn't say
strategy.
It could be an effective strategy if done correctly. It just wasn't done correctly for that particular property.
Okay.
So let me follow up. So you've had conversations with one tier 3 hotel. Have you had conversations with the other two? Or any of the other two that are in
Yes.
tier 3?
Yes.
And how are those conversations going so far?
Productive.
Okay.
Productive, yeah. A lot, again, some of these things are just going to be a matter of them changing a little bit of their procedure more than anything. The physical stuff, you know, one of the properties is already, I think we talked about the last time, has surveillance cameras, security cameras on order. Just, again, supply chain stuff they haven't received them yet.
Okay. No real pushback, though. You haven't had any. Okay.
No, sir.
Well, there we go. Maybe we should then adjourn and go. No. Any questions?
I got one more.
One more. Councilmember Smith, the last
Okay,
one.
so some of the things to get into these tiers to set up correctly, lighting in the parking lots and the cameras, supply chain's a problem. Street lights and other things can take more than 90 days to get in-house and then get installed. We're gonna be able to work with that if they need to put lights up.
Show us you're doing it. Show us a PO, show us a cut check, show us an order form, show us something that they're on the way. And don't just tell us, oh yeah, we're gonna do that.
It's in the mail.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Fantastic. With that, Kim, any further direction?
Thank you for your time.
Chief, any further direction? Then we are adjourned.